Hello, and welcome to ONET Academy. This previously recorded webinar is part of the ONET Academy webinar series, a set of online training presentations. This webinar recording, How to Administer the ONET Ability Profiler, will start momentarily.
Thanks an awful lot. I appreciate it. A few of you were in the session this past Tuesday. That session was an introduction to the ONET Ability Profiler and also did deal a little bit with the other two ONET assessment tools, the Interest Profiler and Work Importance Profiler. This is part 2 of a 3-part session, and it is focusing on how to administer the Ability Profiler. And on Thursday, we are going to talk about how to interpret the results from the Ability Profiler. So a week from today, if you come on, that will be the topic. For those of you that attend all 3 sessions, you will receive a certificate of completion, but you don't have to attend all 3 sessions to get a good grasp of the material because each session stands on its own. So not to worry if you missed last Tuesday or you're going to miss a week from today. So again, we're going to be focusing on the ONET Ability Profiler, and I want to review the available materials that relate to the ONET Ability Profiler. I'd like to specify the contents of the ONET Ability Profiler, discuss the administration options, talk in a little more detail, and actually show you some of the items from each of the subtests and some of the peculiarities, I guess I would say, about administering some of the tests, and also to let you know about some of the other support products that we have available to help you out with the administration of the Ability Profiler. So as a reminder, there are 3 instruments that the Department of Labor has produced: the Interest Profiler, the Work Importance Locator Profiler, and the Ability Profiler. And again, the ONET Interest Profiler comes in both paper, pencil, and also a computerized format, and it measures work-related interests. The ONET Work Importance Locator or Profiler both come in paper, pencil, and standalone onto your computer program, and it measures job values. The instrument of focus for today is the ONET Ability Profiler. It is only a paper-pencil instrument. That is a test booklet that a test taker would read as you read the administration directions, and then they fill out their answers on a bubble answer sheet, just like a normal assessment. And it measures what an individual can do well, or work-related abilities. The ONET Ability Profiler has 11 subtests to it, or 11 parts. Those parts are listed here. The first part is Arithmetic Reasoning, and then Vocabulary, 3-dimensional space, Computation, Name Comparison, and so on. When we talk about the 11 subtests, there are several ways that we can talk about them. One is to discuss them in terms of power tests and speeded tests. And power tests are generally assessments that have a generous amount of time so that most people can complete most of the items or all of the items. Speeded tests, on the other hand, are, you really pay attention to the word speeded. There is not sufficient time for everyone to answer all of the items because the main purpose of a speeded test is to find out how quickly and accurately a person can perform the tasks or answer the items. So power tests are more how much do you know about the subject matter. The speeded tests, how fast can you do it? How fast and accurately can you do it, because accuracy matters. Another way to describe the 11 tests are non-psychomotor and psychomotor. And non-psychomotor would be more in the line of academic assessment, so it's kind of the brain power. Psychomotor assessments are involving the use of your hands and your body in some way, so there is manipulation of equipment or materials. So several different ways of looking at the 11 subtests and kind of categorizing them in order to understand the basic premise behind them. Now, there are a bunch of administration and testing materials that come along with the Ability Profiler. There's a user's guide, which is probably the first document that any of you who are probably going to be administering the Ability Profiler would want to read. There's some background information about the ability profiler, some basic technical information, and use of results and policies and all. So that is an important document. Probably the key document is the administration manual, and the administration manual contains the words and the timing that you need to use and apply as you administer the ability profiler. And those words are exactly the words that you need to speak as you are administering the ability profiler. There's no paraphrasing. There's no deciding to do it another way. There's no deciding to do it in a different order. You have to do it exactly by the book, and the book is the administration manual. That manual also contains the amount of time that each subtest is allotted. And so you need to have a stopwatch and make sure that that timing is followed exactly to the letter or to the second. Then there's a record of apparatus scores and three-dimensional space cutouts, which I will actually show you in a little later on in this webinar. So I'll pass on any details on that right now. And then on Tuesday, we talked a little bit about the automated scoring software, which is merely a process by which the bubble answer sheet gets scanned, it interacts with the scoring program, and an individual score report is generated. We're not going to be focusing on that today. For the test taker, there is the actual test booklet, Ability Profiler Form 1, Tool for Career Exploration. There is the bubble answer sheet. There is the mark-making answer sheet, which, again, we will show a little bit later on in the webinar. It is part of one of the psychomotor assessments. And then there's that score report that I referred to that is generated for each individual that takes the assessment. And then the apparatus for dexterity tests, and we'll actually show some pictures of the manipulatives or of the materials that people have to use for the assessments that use the dexterity materials. All right. The ability profiler, probably one of the most important things stated in this webinar is that the results are to be used only for career exploration and career counseling, not for job selection or selection into job training programs. You can administer the ability profiler to one person or a group of persons. And again, it comes only in paper pencil form. And the files and the actual assessment can actually be downloaded from the onetcenter.org website, and you can make multiple copies of any of the materials as you need them. There's some administration to examinee requirements. And for parts 1 through 6, which are the non-psychomotor assessments, you need one administrator for every 10 examinees and one assistant to help you out for every additional 10 examinees. For parts 7 through 11, which are the psychomotor assessments, you have to have one administrator for every 5 examinees and one assistant for every additional 5 examinees. So the resource requirements in terms of people are much greater for the psychomotor assessments. And as we describe those a little bit later on, you'll see why it is important to have additional people helping out with those psychomotor assessments. You have some administration options. You can administer all 11 subtests. You can administer the 6 paper pencil and the mark-making subtests, which are 7 of the 11 tests. Or for the third option, you can just do the 6 paper pencil test. And it depends on what kind of information you need to help the client or the client needs in order to help make a decision about career exploration. There's some basic sets of procedures that one has to follow because the ability profiler is a standardized test. And by that, we mean that every person who takes the ability profiler has to take it in the same way. And the only way that that can be guaranteed is that the administration directions and the timing in the administrator's manual have to be followed exactly. Again, there's no deviation in terms of paraphrasing, no deviation in terms of timing, no deviation in terms of the order that the tests are given, and so on. And that's kind of an issue of fairness, because if one person gets more time than another individual, they're able to answer correctly more items, and that would then give them a different score than they would have gotten if they would have had the exact amount of time that is suggested by the administration manual. So in order for the results to be valid and utilized, everyone has to take the test under the same circumstances. And that also means the testing environment, that you're providing an environment where you're encouraging or allowing the person to be able to perform their very best. So the place needs to be comfortable, well-lit, quiet, well-ventilated. Examinee requirements. The person needs to be at least 16 years old, needs to be able to read English at the 6th grade level, and has not taken the test for the past 6 months. And that's to make sure that this thing called the practice effect is not interfering with the person's responses. And again, as an issue of fairness, as well as validity of the results, everyone should be treated the same, except where there are needed accommodations for persons with disabilities. Allowed accommodations include changing the timing of the test, but only on the power test, and that's arithmetic, reasoning, vocabulary, and three-dimensional space. The reason for that is that the amount of time allotted for those three assessments is very generous, and so just about everyone gets to finish answering all of the items on those assessments. So if there's a person with a documented learning disability, for example, it's all right to give a little bit of extra time for that individual in order to be able to come close to completing all of the items. You cannot change the timing on the speeded tests, and that's because the speeded tests are designed so that we're finding out or trying to find out how well and accurately how quickly and accurately they can answer the items or perform the task. So you cannot change the timing on the speeded test. You can change the print size, and again, that's for the power test and also for name comparison for people that have visual disabilities. And we need very much to make sure that the people that are taking the test understand the directions. And as we go through each of the subtests and the kind of items that are part of those subtests, you'll see that some of the directions are perhaps different than what one would normally encounter. So making sure they understand what they need to do on each of the subtests, how they need to approach it, what kind of items they are given, you need to make sure that they're understanding everything that applies to that particular subtest. All right, other accommodations, assistance with the answer sheet, steadying or locking down a wheelchair, that sort of thing. I mentioned on Tuesday a couple of resources that might be useful. And one is a document called Pre-Employment Testing in the ADA. And that is really a very user-friendly document that describes for the layperson the effects of making various accommodations on the validity of an assessment. And that's available free from that website, from my website, which is listed there. And you just go to free downloads, and you can find that document and download it and read it, share it with your colleagues, whatever. And there's a book that I suggest for people who want to dive into that subject in much more detail. It's called Assessing Individuals with Disabilities in Education, Employment, and Counseling Settings, and it's published and sold by the American Psychological Association. All right, I want to stop. I kind of rushed through the first section because we have some people that are repeating from Tuesday, but we have some new people as well. So I want to stop and see if there are any questions or comments that you have at this point before I push on to the next section of the webinar.
Yes, I have a question.
Uh-huh.
Do the persons that are giving the test, do they have to have any type of training or anything in order to use this material?
Well, I would say once I get through showing you the kinds of items, you'll see that it would be really helpful if the person who's going to administer this reads the user's manual, reads the administration manual, and actually practices administering the assessment to, say, colleagues or other volunteers before you actually administer it in real life.
Okay.
There is no formal training requirement.
Okay.
And no certification that's necessary or anything along that line.
All right, that answers my question. Thank you.
Okay. Anyone else? Okay, let me push on. What I'm going to do now is actually show you example assessments, or example items from each of the assessments so you get a feel for the kinds of items that are appearing on the ability profiler. And the first is Arithmetic Reasoning, and it is a power test. There are 18 items that a person has to complete in 20 minutes. So it's an ample amount of time. And prior to each of the assessments, prior to administering each of the subtests, a person gets to practice the kinds of items that they will find on the test. So there's sample items or practice items for each of the subtests. What you see here is one of those practice items. Candy bars cost 65 cents each. How much will 6 candy bars cost? The person calculates the answer, and after they get the answer, they fill in the bubble on the bubble answer sheet that relates to the answer that they have selected. Now, this is an actual item from the Ability Profiler. A bookshelf is 4 3/4 feet wide. How many 3-inch wide books will fit on the shelf? The person calculates the information and selects the answer and fills in the proper bubble on the bubble answer sheet. So that's Arithmetic Reasoning. You can see that they are word problems. Vocabulary. Vocabulary is also a power test, 19 items in 8 minutes. And here is there are a couple example or sample items that I'm going to be showing you. But I want to emphasize the fact that the directions are perhaps a little bit different than you may have encountered before. And the directions are, for each question, choose the 2 words that are either most nearly the same in meaning or most nearly the opposite in meaning. And then for each question, fill in the oval under the letter combination of your answer. Okay, so we take a look at A, B, C, and D. And we're supposed to look at those words and determine which of those 2 words are most nearly the same in meaning or most nearly the opposite in meaning.
Okay, so begin and end, and then...
What would the answer be for that?
C and D?
C and D, begin and end, and that's because they're most the opposite.
Opposite.
Yeah.
There's Marva.
And so they, in the bubble answer sheet, they would fill in the bubble under C and the bubble under D. So it's not selecting the one single right answer. It's actually filling in 2 bubbles. And so that's why I'm suggesting that you need to make sure that the person who's taking the test understands what they're supposed to do on each of the assessments, because this is something that they may not have encountered before. All right, so we have the second set of words, A, B, C, and D, and what's the answer to that one?
A and D. Frighten and scare.
Okay, frighten and scare, and that's because they're most nearly the same.
Yeah, similar.
Yeah. So they would fill in the A and the D on the bubble answer sheet. All right, so here now we have an actual item. And what would the answer be to this?
C and D.
All right, so B and
darken and illuminate?
Yeah, darken and illuminate. So you would fill in the bubble under B and D, darken and illuminate. And that's because they're most nearly the opposite.
Opposite.
Yeah. Okay, 3-dimensional space. This is another assessment that it's quite possible people have not taken an assessment that's quite like this before. It is also a power test, 20 items in 8 minutes. And we talked about the fact of having the cutouts. What the cutouts are actually shapes on cardstock paper that you punch out or cut out, and you literally would demonstrate to the person or persons taking the test that when you take this shape, that's a two-dimensional shape, and you fold it into a three-dimensional object, that this is now what it looks like. So you would actually manipulate this cardboard cutout to show them what they're supposed to do on the assessment mentally, not physically. So let's take a look at a sample item. In the left-hand square, we have a shape. It's a two-dimensional shape. Looks like a star. That the dotted lines in the middle are where you are supposed to mentally fold that shape. And then you are supposed to take that image that you have developed in your mind and take a look at the four objects in the right-hand rectangle. And you're supposed to identify which of those shapes would be the result if you folded that original two-dimensional shape. And so which one is it likely to be?
B as in boy.
Yes, absolutely. All right, so when you fold that, it looks like B. All right, let's take a look at this one. Here it's a rectangular piece. You would fold it along that dotted line. And what would it look like if it would be folded?
A.
Can you see that it would be A? So you would take that left-hand side and bring it over, fold it on the dotted line and bring it over to the right-hand side, and it would look exactly like A. All right, this is an actual item on the Ability Profiler. So the person is asked to take a look at this two-dimensional shape, presume it gets folded one end to the other, and then select the option what it would look like if it was folded. And so the answer to that would be D. Can you see how if you folded this end to end, it would look like B?
Yes.
Okay. Some of these three-dimensional space items are difficult for some people because of the kind of mental manipulation you need to do. That's why it's very important to have those practice items in order to help the person understand better what they're supposed to do on the assessment. All right, computation. Here it gets, I think, back to what we might be more used to. Speeded test, 40 items in 6 minutes. And so they are the add, subtract, multiply, and divide kinds of items. And so the person would, these are practice items, multiply 3 times 4, and the answer would be C, 12. Divide 2 into 6, the answer would be A, 3. And you do these as quickly and as accurately as you can. And with this one, there is actually a penalty for guessing, penalty for wrong answer. Computation items, this is an actual item off the Ability Profiler. So you can see that they do get a little more difficult than the first two practice items, but basically it's addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. Name comparison, this is also a speeded test, 90 items in 6 minutes. So you can see we're going pretty quickly. And this, again, is one of those assessments where the directions are perhaps a little bit different. And what you're supposed to do is take a look at the words in the left-hand column, compare it to the words in the right-hand column, and determine whether those words and letters are the same or different. So the directions are, if the names are exactly the same, fill in the oval under S. If they are different in any way, fill in the oval under D. So you can see that for item number 3, Brim's CO and Brim's company are different. So the person would fill in the bubble under D. For the next one, item 4, you can see that the left-hand side and the right-hand side are exactly the same. So the person would fill in the oval or the bubble under S. And they would roar through these kinds of items as fast as they can and as accurately as they can. Again, 90 items, 90 of these in 6 minutes. So you're ripping through them fairly quickly. Here are some actual items off the Ability Profiler. You can see that these are perhaps a little more difficult, but the concept is the same. If they're exactly the same, the bubble under S is filled in. If they're different in any way, the bubble under D is filled in. All right, object matching. This also is a speeded test, 42 items in 5 minutes. And here are some practice items. The whole notion behind this is to take a look at the object in that left-hand square and find the exact duplicate of the 4 options on the right-hand side. And so you can see that D is the one that's exactly the same as the one in the left-hand square. Same thing for this one. You have to take a look at the details, and you see that C is the correct answer. This is an actual item off the Ability Profiler, so you can see that object matching becomes a little bit more difficult. And basically the concept is the same. You take a look at what's in the left-hand square and find the exact duplicate of the 4 options on the right-hand side. And as you can see, hopefully, the exact duplicate is C. So you see that there are an awful lot of little details in various places your eye needs to go and compare from the original or to the original. All right, mark making. Mark making is a paper-pencil assessment, but it is a psychomotor assessment. It also is a speeded test. You have 2 practice trials of 10 seconds each, and then 1 final trial of 60 seconds, which is going to give you the final result or the final score. All right. We talked about the mark-making answer sheet at the very beginning, and this is a portion of what it looks like. What the individual needs to do, or is asked to do, is to, in each square, make 2 vertical lines and a horizontal line, as we see here, and do that in every square as fast as possible. So, again, they get 2 practice trials of 10 seconds each, and then after that, after they kind of get the gist of what they're supposed to do, you do an actual trial of 60 seconds, which gives you the total score. So they're madly taking their pencil and filling in 2 vertical and horizontal line in each of the boxes and making as many of them as they can in order to get the total score. So again, it's a paper-pencil assessment, but it's a psychomotor assessment also. All right, this is the end of the paper-pencil test, and I want to move on to the psychomotor tests that utilize the equipment. But I want to stop, since I pushed out a lot of information to you. I want to make sure that there are no questions or comments or concerns that we have at this point. So if you have anything that you want to ask, please unmute your phone and let us hear your question. Okay, let me push on. All right. Now, again, these are what I'm going to be describing are the 4 psychomotor assessments that use the specialized equipment that comes with the Ability Profiler. And what I'm going to say right now is what the person needs to do, and it may not be very clear until we take a look at some of the photographs of the equipment and I explain it using the photographs. But the first assessment is called place, and it measures manual dexterity. And the object is to move the pegs from the holes in the top section of the board to the corresponding holes in the bottom section of the board. The person gets a practice trial, and then 3 real trials, and then the total score is the sum of those 3 trials. Each trial is 15 seconds. So here you can see that if you give a person an extra 5 seconds of time, that's a substantial amount of time in comparison to what that 15 seconds is. So you're really giving the person a huge advantage by giving them just 5 seconds more of time to complete this assessment. So that's why the timing is critically important. So you actually have a stopwatch. You are as precise as you possibly can be on that 15-second limit. All right, let's take a look at what a person has to do. All right, for place, they use a piece of equipment that looks like this. When it is put together, it actually looks like a wooden briefcase, and it actually has a handle, which you can see down at the bottom here, and you carry it around like it was a briefcase. But when you open it up, you arrange it in this particular way, that the top and the bottom half all have holes. But in the top half, you take the pegs and you fill each hole with a peg. And a peg is about, I would say, 2.5 inches or so long, and it just fits right into the hole. All right, what the person has to do is take the pegs from the top part of the board and put them into the corresponding holes in the bottom portion of the board. And here's how it works. This is a little bit of a close-up. And the person uses both hands, and they go to the top section, these 2 pegs. And they actually literally pick up the pegs from that position and bring them down to the corresponding holes in the bottom section of the board. After they do that, they go back to the top, pick up the next 2 pegs, put them in the corresponding holes in the bottom section. And they do this going from the top half, from the bottom of the top half, all the way to the top. Then they come back down to the next pair of pegs and do the same thing by bringing them down to the holes in the corresponding section of the board. Okay, so this would be an example of an assessment that is in process. So the person has picked up the 2 pegs from here, put them down in the corresponding holes in the bottom, picked up the next 2, put them down here, and the next 2, and put them down here. This would be an example, or could be an example of the end of a trial. And remember, the trial is 15 seconds. So the person's score is either the number of holes that we have at the top or the number of pegs put in the bottom. So the person has not completed all of this, but has gotten through a large portion of the board. The next assessment, which also measures manual dexterity, is called turn. And the idea is to turn the pegs in a particular sequence based on your handedness or your dominant hand. And note that the pegs, we only saw the white part in the previous photos, but the peg actually is white on half and red on the other half. All right, let's take a look at what this assessment is like with the photographs. Okay, you only use one hand, your dominant hand. You have 3 time trials of 30 seconds, and your score is the sum of the 3 tries. All right, here's how the person would be approaching it. You no longer need to use the entire board, so you can use just half of it, and it actually comes apart, as you can see. And depending upon whether you're right-handed or left-handed will determine exactly where you start and how you deal with this assessment. If you're a right-handed person, you would go to the top right-hand peg. Using your right hand, you pick up that peg, turn it around, stick it back in the hole. Then you would pick up the second peg, turn it around, stick it back in the hole. Then the third, then the fourth, then the fifth, and you work your way basically from right to left. After you finish that row, you would come back to the second row, but on the right-hand side. And you would start working from there to the next peg, to the next peg, all the way through the second row. Then come back to the third row and do the same thing, working your way from right to left. This is a photograph of a probable assessment in progress. So the person has completed the entire top row and has come back to the second row and has begun turning the pegs over in the second row. And then they would, when they finish that row, they would come back to the third row and so on. And this could be an example of a right-handed finish. So they've completed the first row, the second row, and almost the third row. Now, a left-handed person deals with it in the opposite way. They go to the top row, the far left-hand side, using their dominant hand, which is their left hand. They pick up that first peg, turn it over, stick it back in the hole. Then the next peg, next peg, next peg, working their way from left to right. When they finish that first row, they come back to the left-hand side of the second row and continue turning the pegs around, working from left to right. This would be an example of a left-handed person's trial in progress. So they've completed the first row and part of the second row. And this could be an example of a finish. So they've completed the first row, second row, third row, and started on the fourth row. And so their score would be the number of pegs that have been turned over. The third assessment, third psychomotor assessment, is called Assemble, and it measures finger dexterity. And the idea behind that is to put the washer and the rivet together and place it in the proper hole with the dominant hand. The score is how many of these one can do in 90 seconds. Well, that will make more sense once we take a look at the equipment. And the equipment is different from what we've been showing in the previous two psychomotor assessments. And it's a lot smaller. It looks a little bit like a cribbage board, I guess. And it has a top half and a bottom half. And the top half is filled with rivets. So each hole has a rivet in it. There is a pole with washers, and the position of that pole depends on the handedness of the person. So this is an example of where the pole would be for a right-handed person. Now, take a look at the right-hand side here. You can see a little hole. What you do is you take the pole, and it literally screws into the hole. And so for a right-hand person, that pole with the washers is on the left-hand side. For a left-handed person, it would be on the right-hand side. So what the person does is, with their right hand, they would pick up a rivet with their right hand, pick up a washer with their left hand, put the two of them together, and stick it into the corresponding hole. A left-handed person, as I mentioned, would have the pole on the other side. And this is a little closer up of what it looks like. You see the rivet going into the washer, and you see the top half of the board filled with rivets, the bottom half empty. All right, this is a right-handed person. They take that rivet, put it together with the washer, corresponding hole. Then they pick up the next rivet and the washer, put it in the corresponding hole, and do that as fast as you can. This could be an example of a right-handed finish, with the score being either the number of empty holes in the top or the number of washers and rivets that have been put together and placed in the hole in the bottom. This could be an example of a left-handed finish. Note the pole is on the right-hand side, and they have worked with the rivets in the other side. They worked from the right-hand side. So they picked up the washer and the rivet, put it together, and put it in the corresponding hole, and worked through as many as they can in the allotted amount of time. All right, the fourth and last psychomotor assessment is called Disassemble. And basically that's taking apart what they've just put together. So you remove the assembled pair, the washer and the rivet, put the washer on the pole, put the rivet in the hole, and the score is the number of those that you can disassemble in 60 seconds. So basically what you need to do is complete the assemblage first. So you have to fill up, you have to assemble the rivets and the washers and put them in all the holes in the bottom of this board. Then what you do is you pick up, this is for a right-handed person, you pick up the washer and the rivet, pull them apart, put the washer back on the pole, put the rivet in the hole. And this could be an example of a right-handed finish, so that they've taken this many apart, put the washers back on the pole, rivets back in the hole. This is what a left-handed person would do. Note the pole again is on the right-hand side. Taking this assembled pair, pulling them apart, putting the washer back on the pole, the rivet back in the hole, and do that as fast as possible. And this could be an example of a finish for a left-handed person. So they put all the rivets back in the holes, and these are still assembled. So those are the 4 psychomotor assessments, and you can see, I think, that it would probably be a wise thing to try this yourself at home before actually administering it to actual test takers. Actually, I think it would be useful to take it yourself several times and then to see what kind of problems you could encounter, and then also administer it to others as well before you actually administer it to a person who really needs valid and accurate results. All right, so what we see here is what we call the record of apparatus sheet. And I mentioned that early in the webinar, and here's where you use it. It is merely a sheet of paper where you record the person's results on the psychomotor assessments that use the equipment. And so on the top here, you would just list the person's name in the assessment group that you have. And then you would be recording, as the people took their assessments, you would be recording their results for Trial 1 for place, Trial 2 for place, Trial 3 for place, and then totaling those 3 for the total score. Same kind of thing for turn. They have 3 trials. You would record Trial 1, 2, and 3, and then total it. And then you would record their final result for assemble and for disassemble. And you do that for every person that you have in your group. And you do that because now you have to record that information on the bubble answer sheet. So for all the other assessments, the person is actually filling in the bubbles for the correct answer themselves. For the psychomotor assessments, you actually fill in the bubbles. And you would take that sheet that you just filled in and record the results for mark making, place, turn, assemble, and disassemble onto the bubble answer sheet. You see that there is space available for raw scores, parts 7 through 10. You would write in their scores, and then you yourself would fill in the bubbles. And at this point in time now, what you have is a completed answer sheet. The person has taken the non-psychomotor assessments, filled in the bubbles themselves. You fill in this part, and then you have a completed answer sheet. You would send it through the scanner and scoring program to get an individual score report, which we will talk about what that looks like in detail next Thursday. And I want to again stop because, again, that's a lot of information, and those assessments are a bit different from what you might normally encounter. So I want to stop again and see if there are any questions.
You ask it. We do have a question, please.
Okay.
For the dexterity tasks, what do you do with people that have a disability involving one hand? Do you get extra time, or?
It's a speeded test, so you cannot change the time at all.
Okay.
So you really can't get a valid result from the ability profiler for someone who is not able to handle those things.
Okay.
Thank you.
I've tried the finger dexterity one, and one thing I notice is if you have fingernails, they sure get in the way.
Oh. Okay.
So one thing that you might people, or especially the females, is to make sure your nails are clipped before you try this, if in fact that's an important assessment for them. And remember, you have assessment options where you don't need to give those psychomotor assessments if that is not applicable to their career development needs. Other questions?
Yes. If you have somebody in a wheelchair and you need to tilt the test so that they can take it, does that invalidate the results?
Basically, you would have the boards on a table that would be, I would guess, it's chair height. So I don't think that would be an issue. I don't think you need to tilt it so that they can access it easier. You could lock down their wheelchair so that, as they're doing all this, they don't push away from the board. But it really is at table height. Right. Everyone is sitting, taking this, so it should be the same.
All right. What if you have a person who can only really use one hand? Do you only give the test that you can use the one hand?
Yeah, and that would be, the only one would be turn.
Okay. Thank you.
Other questions? Okay, just a little bit more information. In order to support your use of the Ability Profiler, we've developed some other materials, and one is a self-assessment quiz, and you can go to ONETacademy.com and take this self-assessment quiz. It is, again, not for certification, but it's only for your professional development. And the thing that I like about the assessment is if you get an answer wrong, you are actually given the page number within the document, the appropriate document to go to find the correct answer. And usually that's the user's manual or the administration manual. There's also a Lunch and Learn training packet, which has PowerPoint slides, frequently asked questions, an administrator's checklist, which are things you need to do before, during, and after administering the Ability Profiler, some scenarios that, situations that you could be faced with in a testing session, and you would think about what the answer is or discuss the answer with colleagues and then compare what you would do to what the ideal answer is. And then, of course, ONETcenter.org has bunches of information that you can find out, various reports regarding the Ability Profiler. You can actually download a file where you can print out the Ability Profiler assessment or bring it to a print shop and get it made in multiple copies. All the reports can be downloaded and printed and so on. And then I just do want to mention that we do a lot of other webinars, live webinars, and these are some of the titles of them. ONET Tools for School Counselors, for the Older Worker, Military Member in Transition, Job Seekers and Students, and so on. I hope I see you in some of the live webinars, but all of these are archived, and you can go to ONETacademy.com in the recorded webinars section and actually listen to the webinars. You can't participate, you can't ask questions, unfortunately, but you can listen to the general comments and the information that's provided, and also the PowerPoint slides that I've used today and that we've used in these other webinars are posted as well, and you can download them and use them for your own professional development or for giving presentations and training sessions to others. So by all means, visit ONETacademy.com and take advantage of that information. So I want to stop again and see if there are any questions or comments that you have at this point, and if so, unmute your phone and go ahead and ask it or make the comment. Well, hearing none, I thank you very much for your participation, and I hope you have gained some important information in this webinar, and I hope that I see you in future webinars. And again, a week from today, I will be doing a webinar on how to interpret the Ability Profile results. So have a great day, people.